Today's video is about a drug dealer who refused to stop for police on a UK motorway, a serving police officer who used his uniform to help organised criminals steal from their rivals, and a gang who spent years moving millions of pounds worth of drugs into the country without attracting attention. These cases didn't surface overnight. They unfolded across years. Different drugs, different methods, but all were exposed the same way, patiently, methodically, and at the moment the people involved believed they were untouchable. What none of them realized was how early the scrutiny had begun, or how close the investigations were long before the arrests were made. This is the story of organized crime, corruption, and the investigations that dismantled them, and how each case finally caught up with the people at the center of it. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. It was a weekday, traffic moving steadily along one of the busiest motorway corridors in the northwest. By mid-morning, police patrols were already active, monitoring routine traffic and looking for anything out of place. The vehicle came to attention for reasons that, at first, appeared ordinary. Nothing dramatic, just a combination of behavior and circumstance that caused officers to take a second look. The kind of moment that happens countless times every day on Britain's roads. The man behind the wheel, later identified in court as Francis, was not a stranger to criminal networks. He wasn't a leader or operating at the top of the chain. His role was more practical and more exposed. The location also mattered. The stretch of motorway it was traveling on links major towns and cities, and it is regularly used by people moving goods quickly across regions. When officers moved to stop the vehicle, they expected compliance. At that point, there was no guarantee of what they were dealing with, only a sense that the situation needed to be checked properly, but it was the response that changed everything. Instead of slowing, the vehicle continued. Then it accelerated. What should have been a brief roadside interaction became something else entirely, forcing officers to make immediate decisions under pressure. Because with that response, the priority shifted from a routine stop to public safety, containment, and control. Within moments, it was clear this wasn't about a traffic matter at all, and what officers didn't yet know was why the driver was willing to take that risk, or what he was trying to get away from. After the initial attempt to stop the vehicle, Francis failed to comply and remained on the motorway. Instead of pulling over, the BMW continued its speed, prompting officers to declare a pursuit and activate emergency systems. As the chase developed, the vehicle accelerated significantly. Officers later confirmed that speeds reached up to 139 miles per hour as the BMW weaved between lanes of live motorway traffic. Other road users were forced to react with little warning, creating a situation where the margin for error was extremely small. Francis's driving was described as reckless and unpredictable. At one point, after initially following police off the motorway at junction 11 for Daresbury, he accelerated across a traffic island, narrowly missing a heavy goods vehicle before rejoining the motorway he had just left. That maneuver marked a clear escalation in risk. Throughout the pursuit, officers maintained communication with the control room, providing live updates on speed, location, and driving behavior. Supporting units monitored the route, while officers focused on containing the vehicle and preventing the situation from spreading into surrounding roads. The chase continued until the BMW exited the motorway at junction 10 for Stretton. Francis drove through a red traffic light and onto a traffic island, where the vehicle collided with a Toyota Hilux before striking the roadside barriers. Despite the severity of the collision, neither Francis nor the occupants of the Hilux suffered serious injuries. Francis was detained at the scene and arrested for dangerous driving. Officers immediately secured the area and the vehicle, aware that the manner of driving and the attempt to evade police suggested the incident involved more than a traffic offence. Only once the road was reopened and the immediate danger had passed did police begin to assess what had prompted such extreme behaviour and what it might be connected to beyond the motorway. Once the pursuit had ended and the vehicle was brought to a halt, officers turned their attention to the BMW and its occupants. Unlike many cases involving prolonged chases, no drugs were recovered from the carriageway itself. Instead, the focus was on what was found inside the vehicle and what followed immediately after the arrest. During a search of the car, officers discovered a large quantity of cash, wrapped in a rubber band located in the passenger footwell. Francis admitted that the money belonged to him. The presence of cash in those circumstances immediately raised suspicions of money laundering and links to wider criminal activity. At that stage, although no drugs had been found on the motorway or in the car, officers believed the pursuit was connected to drug supply. The manner of driving, the attempt to evade police at extreme speed, the cash recovered, and the effort to damage a phone all pointed towards criminal activity beyond a traffic offense. Those suspicions prompted immediate further action. Police began preparing to search addresses linked to Francis, focusing on whether the motorway incident was connected to the storage or movement of controlled drugs elsewhere. What officers had uncovered so far raised more questions than answers, and it was clear that the most significant evidence had yet to be found. Following the arrest on the M56, the investigation quickly moved beyond the motorway and into Maridud Francis's wider circumstances. Officers from Cheshire Constabulary travelled to North Wales to execute a warrant at an address in Wrexham linked directly to him. The search produced evidence that fundamentally changed the scope of the case. Inside the property, officers discovered approximately 8.6 kilograms of cocaine, with an estimated street value of more than £317,000, alongside around 380 kilograms of cannabis. The quantity and storage of the drugs left no doubt that this was not connected to personal use. Alongside the drugs, police recovered around £10,000 in cash, approximately 1,000 cigarettes, a Rolex watch and designer items, including Versace sunglasses. These items were found inside a navy suitcase belonging to Francis and were treated as further evidence of involvement in drug supply and criminal benefit. Investigators also examined Francis's behavior following his arrest. While in police custody, he was seen attempting to snap a mobile phone that officers had seized from his vehicle. That action was treated as an attempt to destroy potential evidence and reinforce suspicions that the offending extended beyond a single journey. Phone data and movement patterns were reviewed as part of the wider investigation. Prosecutors later argued that the motorway trip was part of ongoing criminal activity involving the supply of controlled drugs. He was charged with offences, including dangerous driving, possession with intent to supply Class A drugs, possession with intent to supply Class B drugs, and possession of criminal property. The court was also provided with background information relevant to assessing intent and risk. These details were not used to sensationalize the case, but to explain why police and prosecutors treated the offense as serious and deliberate rather than impulsive. With the investigation complete, attention turned to how those findings would be tested and judged in court. Maridud Francis appeared at Mould Crown Court on Tuesday 28th of January, where the full scale of the offending was set out before the judge. Having pleaded guilty to all charges, the court moved directly to sentence. Francis was jailed for a total of 4 years and 4 months, equivalent to 52 months imprisonment. The sentence reflected multiple offences. In addition to the custodial sentence, the court imposed a 2-year driving disqualification, which will begin upon his release from prison. Francis was also ordered to take an extended driving test before he can legally return to the road, a requirement reserved for the most serious driving offences. The court also considered the financial element of the case. While detailed Proceeds of Crime Act proceedings were not finalised at sentencing, the recovery of large quantities of drugs, cash and luxury items was central to the judge's assessment of criminal benefit and seriousness. In delivering the final judgment, the court placed significant weight on the danger created during the pursuit. With one investigation concluded, attention turns to a very different case, one that unfolded not on a motorway, but from inside the police force itself. At the center of this case was Kashif Mahmoud, a serving officer with the Metropolitan Police. By the time the offending took place, Mahmoud had already built a legitimate career within policing, operating inside the very system designed to detect and disrupt organized crime. Mahmoud was attached to the emergency response team and was based at Stoke Newington Police Station in North London. This was not a desk role. It involved frontline policing, responding to incidents, carrying out vehicle stops, and operating marked and unmarked police vehicles as part of routine duties. The position came with a high level of trust and autonomy, particularly during patrols. His length of service meant he had full access to police systems, equipment, and vehicles. He was authorized to drive both marked and unmarked cars, wear uniform on duty, and carry out stops under the lawful exercise of police powers. Outwardly, there was nothing to distinguish Mahmoud from any other response officer. He reported for duty, wore the uniform, and operated within expected procedures. There were no obvious signs, at least on the surface, that his role extended beyond legitimate policing activity. This outward normality was critical. It allowed Mahmoud to move freely, ask questions without raising suspicion, and place himself in situations where his presence would not be challenged. What Mahmoud's colleagues did not know was that his role as a police officer placed him directly alongside a criminal network already operating at scale. The organized crime group Mahmoud became involved with was centered around Mohsin Khan, supported by his brothers Shahzad Khan and Shahbaz Khan. Alongside them was Maria Shah, Mohsin Khan's partner, who played a role in handling and concealing criminal cash. Together, they formed a group engaged in the wholesale supply of Class A drugs and the laundering of large sums of money. Their activities were not confined to street-level supply. Instead, they focused on wholesale distribution, with cash proceeds moving regularly between individuals and locations. The group also had international links. Investigators established that members of the network traveled to Dubai, where connections were maintained and coordination took place away from the UK. These trips were not casual holidays. They were used to sustain relationships, discuss logistics, and manage the movement of money connected to drug supply. Communication within the group relied heavily on EncroChat. Messages recovered after the system was infiltrated by European law enforcement provided investigators with detailed insight into how the group operated, how money was moved, and how Mahmoud's role as a police officer was exploited. A further key figure was Ioan Gergel, a civilian associate who assisted Mahmoud during fake police stops. His key and very crucial role in detail will be discussed in a few minutes. Within the hierarchy, Mohsin Khan was treated as the central figure. He coordinated activity and maintained oversight of both drug supply and money laundering. Others played defined roles within the structure, carrying out tasks as required rather than acting independently. The organization functioned with discipline, planning, and a clear chain of command. It was into this established network, already dealing in drugs and cash at scale, that a serving police officer would insert himself, offering something no other member could. With the group in place and communication secured, the next step was exploiting the one advantage that set them apart from rival criminals: direct access to police powers. As the conspiracy developed, the scale of what was being taken became clear. Evidence recovered from encrypted communications and police investigations showed that at least £850,000 in criminal cash was seized through these fake police interventions. The money was taken directly from couriers who believed they were dealing with legitimate officers acting lawfully. The court also heard that this figure did not represent the full extent of the offending. There were attempted seizures that did not succeed, including one operation where the target was £500,000 in cash. Even when seizures failed, the planning and intent demonstrated how confident the group had become in using a serving officer to intercept money belonging to rival criminals. One of the most significant incidents took place on the 8th of March 2020 during a stop in Chingford, East London. On that occasion, Mahmoud used a marked police vehicle to intervene during what was believed to be a cash transfer connected to drug supply. Although the exact amount seized on that date could not be fully quantified, it was described as substantial and formed part of the wider pattern of offending. These interventions placed the couriers themselves in serious danger. By losing large sums of cash without any official record or explanation, they were left unable to account to those higher up the criminal chain. The court was told that this exposed them to potential retaliation, as they had no proof that the money had been lawfully seized. The method allowed them to profit without moving drugs themselves, relying instead on authority and deception. But the success of the scheme depended on secrecy. And that secrecy began to unravel when investigators gained access to the group's communications. The turning point came in April 2020, when French authorities succeeded in infiltrating EncroChat. As the data was shared with UK authorities, investigators began identifying conversations linked to drug supply, money laundering, and corrupt activity. Among them were messages that directly implicated Kashif Mahmoud. The communications showed him receiving information about cash movements and coordinating his actions around those tip-offs. The case was taken on by the Metropolitan Police's Anti-Corruption Unit, which began a focused investigation into Mahmoud's conduct. Surveillance was put in place, and his movements, vehicle usage, and access to police systems were examined in detail. Investigators compared EncroChat messages against police logs, vehicle records, and duty times, building a picture of how his official role had been exploited. One incident proved particularly significant. Mahmoud's body-worn camera footage captured activity that was later used as evidence, contradicting legitimate policing explanations and reinforcing the prosecution case that his actions were not lawful. This footage formed part of the wider body of evidence showing deliberate misuse of police powers. Investigators also established that Mahmoud had misused police computer systems, accessing information for the benefit of the criminal network rather than for legitimate policing purposes. This conduct went beyond individual incidents and demonstrated a sustained breach of trust. Arrests followed soon after. Mahmoud and others connected to the network were arrested in April 2020, with further arrests carried out in July 2020 as the investigation widened. By that point, the evidence gathered from encrypted messages, surveillance, and internal police records left little doubt about the scale of the corruption. With the network exposed through surveillance and encrypted communications, investigators moved quickly to secure physical proof, shifting the focus from intelligence to doors being forced, properties searched, and evidence seized. As arrests were made, officers moved quickly to secure evidence across a number of linked addresses connected to the wider network. Warrants were executed at properties associated with the Khan brothers, Maria Shah, and Eoin Gergel. Here the key relation of Gergel is he posed as a police officer on multiple occasions, reinforcing the appearance of legitimacy during unlawful cash seizures. He was not a serving officer, but his role was central to the execution of the scheme, with each search adding to the picture already emerging from encrypted messages and surveillance. Significant amounts of cash were recovered from multiple locations. Bundles of money were found stored inside homes, reinforcing the prosecution case that the funds were proceeds of organized criminal activity rather than legitimate income. In some cases, the quantities were substantial enough to require counting machines and formal seizure procedures. One of the most shocking facts about this case comes into play when police also examined the address he shared with his wife, Shireen Kashif, who was at the time also a serving Metropolitan Police officer. When officers attended the property in April 2020 to arrest Mahmoud, a shoebox containing a significant quantity of cash was present inside the bedroom. Evidence presented to the court showed that Shireen Kashif moved and concealed the box during the police raid, acting on her husband's instructions. In interview, she later admitted that she had moved the box during the search. Known it belonged to her husband, and taken steps that prevented officers from locating it. Although she claimed she only became aware of Mahmoud's criminal activity shortly before the raid, the judge rejected the suggestion that she had no understanding of what she was concealing. Police also recovered drugs, including quantities of cannabis, from addresses linked to the group. While the primary focus of the corruption scheme had been the interception of criminal cash, the presence of controlled substances supported the court's finding that the network remained actively involved in drug supply alongside money laundering. Alongside cash and drugs, officers seized designer goods, luxury watches, and other high-value items. These were treated as lifestyle evidence, used to demonstrate criminal benefit and to challenge claims that those involved were not profiting from the activity. Some items were later assessed during financial investigations into the proceeds of crime. Crucially, the searches helped establish clear links between all defendants. Items recovered at different properties connected individuals to one another, matching contact details, financial movements, and EncroChat communications already in evidence. What might have appeared as isolated roles instead formed a connected network, each part supporting the others. By the end of the raids, investigators had assembled physical evidence to sit alongside digital material and witness testimony, leaving little room for doubt about how the group operated and who was involved. With the evidence secured and the network fully mapped, the case moved towards sentencing, where the consequences of the corruption would finally be decided. The case reached Southwark Crown Court in 2021. The scale of the offending and the damage it caused was laid out in full. Kashif Mahmoud faced charges of conspiracy to acquire criminal property and misconduct in public office, while his co-defendants were charged with a range of offences linked to drug supply, money laundering, and handling criminal property. Several defendants entered guilty pleas, including Mahmoud, while others were convicted following proceedings based on the strength of encrypted messages, surveillance, and physical evidence recovered during raids. In mitigation, Mahmoud's defense pointed to his background, describing a difficult upbringing and previous ambition to serve as a police officer. He expressed remorse and claimed he had not personally profited from the cash seized, arguing that he did not live an extravagant lifestyle and disputing the value of some items presented as evidence. The judge rejected any attempt to minimize the seriousness of Mahmoud's conduct. He described it as a gross abuse of trust, stressing that Mahmoud had exploited not only the public but also his fellow officers. The corruption, the court ruled, struck at the integrity of policing itself. Mahmoud was formally dismissed from the Metropolitan Police without notice and placed on the barred list, preventing him from ever serving as a police officer again. Both the Met and the Independent Office for Police Conduct issued statements condemning his actions as a complete betrayal of public trust and emphasizing that corruption of this nature would be pursued relentlessly. Mahmoud was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment, reduced from 12 years to reflect his early guilty plea. He received no separate penalty for misconduct in public office. As the court ruled, it was sufficiently reflected in the overall sentence. The co-defendants received substantial custodial sentences. Mohsin Khan was jailed for 16 years. Shahbaz Khan received 14 years, while Shahzad Khan was sentenced to 15 years. Maria Shah was jailed for 5 years and 4 months, and Eoin Gargill received 6 years. All were banned from travelling outside the UK for 5 years following their release. Mahmoud's wife, Shireen Kashif, received a 20-month suspended sentence and was dismissed from the Met, a separate outcome that the court treated as distinct from her husband's crimes. With one case concluded, attention now turns to the next, another operation, another network, and another belief that it could all stay hidden. Between 2017 and 2018, an organised crime group quietly established one of the largest cannabis importation networks uncovered in the UK in recent years. The operation was not built overnight. It relied on planning, repetition, and the careful use of systems designed for legitimate trade. Over that period, Investigators later concluded the group was responsible for importing around 2.5 tons of cannabis into the UK. If sold at street level, the drugs were valued at approximately £15.45 million. To keep the operation hidden, the group relied on a series of fake commercial fronts designed to look legitimate on paperwork, but collapse under even basic scrutiny. These businesses existed only long enough to receive a small number of high-value consignments before being quietly discarded. One of the main fronts presented itself as a kitchen supply company, supposedly importing specialist equipment into the UK. On documents, deliveries were described as items such as oven filters or kitchen components. In reality, these packages were used to conceal bulk quantities of cannabis, vacuum-packed and disguised to pass as commercial goods. Other shipments were routed through bogus cold storage firms, created to justify the movement of refrigerated loads. These companies claimed to handle fresh produce, allowing drugs to be hidden among pallets of vegetables, including lettuce and peppers. The method exploited the fact that perishable goods move quickly through ports and distribution centers, limiting the time available for detailed inspections. Addresses linked to these businesses often led not to functioning warehouses or offices, but to lock-up units and industrial yards. Locations in Loughton and Bolton were repeatedly used, providing temporary storage points where loads could be received, broken down, and redistributed. Each business followed the same pattern. It would be used for a small number of deliveries, sometimes only once or twice, before being abandoned. Names were changed, paperwork moved on, and a new front would take its place. This rotation reduced exposure and made it harder for patterns to be spotted early. The packaging methods were simple but effective. For a time, the strategy worked, but the repetition of routes, addresses, and methods would eventually draw attention. And as investigators later discovered, these cover businesses were only one layer of a much larger operation still running quietly in the background. At the center of the operation was Scott Byrne, the individual prosecutors described as the organizer and controlling figure behind the conspiracy. Byrne was not involved in handling drugs day to day. Instead, he managed the operation at a distance, overseeing routes, front companies, and the movement of consignments from Spain into the UK. To the outside world, Byrne maintained a carefully constructed cover. He presented himself as a second-hand car dealer, and his frequent travel to mainland Europe was explained away as business trips or journeys linked to his son's motocross competitions. In reality, those trips were used to coordinate shipments, meet contacts, and manage the logistics of the supply chain. He owned property near Alicante, further embedding his presence in Spain without raising immediate suspicion. Supporting Byrne were several trusted associates, each with defined responsibilities. Wesley Kanzler, described in court as a close and trusted associate, played a key role in facilitating imports and linking UK-side activity to Byrne's instructions. His involvement placed him at the operational core of the conspiracy. Michael Lawler and Tony Cadman were connected to the use of lock-up units and storage locations, including those in Loughton and Bolton. These sites were critical staging points, allowing consignments to be received and moved onward without drawing attention to a single fixed base. Further down the chain was Lee Jackson, whose role emerged after police recovered drugs from a stolen vehicle linked back to the group. Each arrest and seizure revealed how tightly interconnected the network was, with individuals relying on one another to keep the operation moving. But as the organization expanded, so did the number of points where it could be exposed, and it would only take one interruption for the entire structure to begin unraveling. As investigators traced the movement of consignments beyond storage units and distribution hubs, attention turned to a rural site in North Wales, Bog Farm, near Eryris. What appeared on the surface to be an isolated farm would later be revealed as part of the group's longer-term plan to control production as well as importation. Hidden on the land was a concealed underground bunker constructed using buried storage containers. The structure had been deliberately built below ground, with access carefully disguised to avoid detection. Inside, The layout and fittings showed it was intended to function as a commercial-scale cannabis farm, capable of producing large quantities of the drug independently of imports. The bunker had been constructed several years before police discovery, indicating a level of foresight and investment. However, despite the planning, the site never became operational in the way the group had intended. The conditions at the farm proved unsuitable. The underground environment was too damp, making it impossible to maintain the climate required for sustained cannabis cultivation. As a result, production was abandoned before it could reach full scale. When police eventually raided Bog Farm, they found evidence of the failed operation rather than an active grow. 2 men linked to the site were arrested: Michael Moore, who had been living in the farmhouse, and Michael Harley, who was staying in a caravan on the land. Both men later admitted their involvement in constructing and attempting to operate the bunker. Their arrests confirmed that the group's ambitions extended beyond smuggling alone. They were prepared to invest in domestic production if conditions allowed. The bunker may have failed, but it provided investigators with another crucial link, tying rural Wales directly into an international drugs network already under scrutiny. The operation began to unravel in August 2018, when Border Force officers at Port of Dover intercepted one of the group's consignments. The load had arrived disguised as a legitimate commercial delivery, concealed among pallets of fresh produce. When officers examined it more closely, they uncovered 177 kilograms of cannabis, with an estimated street value of more than £1.5 million. That seizure marked a turning point. It was no longer a matter of isolated suspicion, but clear evidence of a large-scale importation conspiracy. From that point, investigators moved quickly to identify where the shipment was headed and who was responsible for receiving it. Police raids followed at a series of lockup units linked to the false businesses used by the group. At one site in Loughton, officers discovered further evidence connecting the premises to earlier imports. At another lockup in Bolton, police found a stolen Mercedes, inside which was cannabis worth around £20,000. The vehicle became a crucial piece of evidence, tying together multiple strands of the investigation. As each site was searched, officers began linking evidence across locations. Packaging methods matched those used in intercepted shipments. Addresses, phone records, and vehicle movements aligned with the cover companies already under scrutiny. What initially appeared to be separate storage points were, in reality, part of a single coordinated network. Arrests followed on both sides of the operation. In the UK, members of the group were taken into custody as the scale of the conspiracy became clear. Meanwhile, Scott Byron was arrested in Spain after a European arrest warrant was issued. He was detained near Alicante, where he owned property and had been using time abroad to manage elements of the operation. Following his arrest, Byron was held by Spanish authorities before being extradited to the UK. His return marked the final collapse of the network's leadership, bringing the investigation full circle from the supply base in Spain back to the courts in England. Only once Byron was back in British custody could the full case be brought together and prepared for trial. By this stage, the group's infrastructure had collapsed. What remained was to account for the full extent of the offending and to determine how the courts would respond to a conspiracy measured not in kilograms but in tons. When the case reached Manchester Crown Court, the scale of the conspiracy was laid bare through sentencing. The court heard the details about the operation that we have all discussed earlier. In passing sentence, the judge made clear that the motivation throughout had been financial gain, with little regard for the wider harm caused by flooding communities with drugs. Following conviction, the case moved into Proceeds of Crime Act proceedings. Prosecutors argued that Byron had benefited by almost £9.8 million from the conspiracy. However, when his assets were examined, only £18,235 could be identified, including a luxury watch and 2 mobile phones. The court issued a confiscation order for that amount, with a warning that further assets could be seized if discovered in the future. Scott Byrne received one of the longest sentences. He was jailed for 14 years and 2 months. Significant sentences were also imposed on Byrne's key associates. Tony Cadman was jailed for 12 years, while Wesley Kinsella and Michael Lawler each received 9-year prison terms. Lee Jackson was sentenced to 9 years and 4 months for his role in the importation conspiracy. Michael Moore and Michael Harley were each jailed for 2 years and 9 months after pleading guilty. Taken together, the sentences amounted to more than 5 decades in prison. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK crime documentaries.